So I'll formally introduce him. So the fourth session of the day is, you hadn't already guessed, got lots of people on it. So it's going to be a panel discussion, and we'll focus on the future of pharma manufacturing and Industry 4.0. And again, feature a number of people, and we'll offer multiple and very different perspectives. So we're excited to have everyone here today, and we hope you find it an interesting discussion. I've had numerous conversations with the panelists in the past, and I do believe that there's going to be some really exciting bits of information shared. So to formally introduce everybody, if you could welcome the following panelists. We have Sultan Aziz, who is Senior Director, Product Supply Strategy Management for Johnson & Johnson. Now, Stephen Driver, who we've just heard from, who's just presented, Global Energy Program Director for Sanofi. We have Eric Sachia, who is Principal Research Scientist for AbbVie. Scott Brown, Architect Connected Plant for Andelin Biosciences. And Shanae Shah, who's Director of Automation for Continuous Pharmaceutical. And finally, our moderator, Daniel Dalmeida. I hope I pronounced that right, Daniel, who is Product Executive for Citara. So before we start, I'd like to remind everyone, you've joined in listen-only mode, so you are muted. There's various areas within the system that I would encourage you to use. So there's a Q&A section on the right-hand side. So if you've got any questions for the panel, just drop them in the Q&A box, and we'll answer those questions towards the end of the session. So let's kick things off. I'll hand over to the moderator for the session. Daniel, over to you.
Thanks, Mark. Appreciate it. So truth to be told, this is my first time moderating. I'm usually on the other side, so this is going to be something new for me. But, great panel we have here. So my name is Dan D'Almeida. I'm the head of product management at Citara. I've spent most of my career in technology and laboratories. I actually started as a chemist. I have been in software companies for about 15 years, doing a variety of things. But enough about me. I'm just going to go around and let everyone have the opportunity to say a little about themselves and what they do for their companies. So I'll start with Sultan here at the top left.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Sultan Aziz, part of Johnson & Johnson's supply chain. I serve in an enterprise role, and I'm looking after the portfolio of innovation projects under the umbrella of Industry 4.0 across our supply chain. So that includes our pharmaceutical business, medical devices, consumer health, as well as quality, engineered property services, etc. So great to be with you all.
Thank you. Scott, you're up next.
Scott Brown, architect for the Connected Plant at Andelin Biosciences. We're still cell gene and gene therapy CDMO based in Columbus, Ohio. My group is responsible for kind of the nexus of automation engineering, IT infrastructure, and data.
Awesome. Stephen.
Yeah, excellent. So Steve Driver, Sanofi Energy Program Director for our Specialty Care Division. I work and partner with our sites to find energy ideas and initiatives and work with them from the concept to the completion of the project. So I look after sites here in Framingham, Massachusetts, and Northborough. Then in France, I have Lyon, Littré, and Vitry. And then we have a big manufacturing site in Heel, Belgium. Also sites in Frankfurt, Germany, and in Waterford, Ireland. So I've basically been with the company. I started out as Genzyme 20 years ago. I've gone through a number of roles. I've been an HVAC mechanical engineer, commissioning engineer, project manager, but I've been in the energy role since 2010, and it's just been a constant evolution of change. They didn't have a solution for the demand side. They had everybody tracking the environmental performance, but they didn't really have anybody at that point in time to push the project. So that's basically what I do. Yep.
Fantastic. Eric.
Hi, my name's Eric Sachia. I'm with AbbVie. My background is as a chemical engineer, specifically with a focus on process engineering and reaction engineering. I've had various roles at DuPont and AbbVie. I sit within AbbVie Center for Reaction Engineering, but with my background, I've had different opportunities for scaling up from lab to plant and pilot plant in between, and the integration of sensors and those types of applications, as well as currently sitting within the Center for Reaction Engineering, working more on the R&D side of things and where the organization should move in the direction of scaling up innovative technologies. So excited to be here today.
Glad to have you. And last but not least, Shanu.
Hi, my name is Shanu Shah. I'm the Director of Automation here at Continus Pharmaceutical. My background is also from chemical engineering, and my experience has been working with various companies like Genzyme, Shire, and others. My background comes purely from automation side, basically leading into configuration, all the way into getting into different platforms, process historian, MES, and so on. So I'm responsible for building a brand new plant for Continus, which will deliver the next generation world-class continuous manufacturing.
Wow, awesome. So we've got a list of questions here for all the panelists. We'll set a little ground rules first, I guess. So I'm going to call on one person to really start off the discussion. Again, this is meant to be a discussion, so feel free to jump in if you have anything to add. If not, we'll move on to the next question, and let's make this interactive and fun and interesting for the crowd here. So with that, we'll start with the first question. We'll pass that to you, Sultan, which will be, how far has IoT and pharma manufacturing really come? How's it being leveraged, and how far do you think it needs to go from where we are today?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Dan. I think if I reflect on this, and within the context of Johnson & Johnson, at least, we have made progress, I would say, over the past 6 years. IoT has come a long way. Of course, it's evident, and we're all using it at home. If you're driving a Tesla, certainly is probably the most connected IoT business that I know of or I'm aware of. But I think we've got a long ways to go. So while we've made progress, I think the focus has been predominantly, at least in the pharma business, right? Asset performance optimization, what Steve talked about, energy maintenance, bringing sensors capabilities. We've been focusing on things such as real-time release as we are making our various pharmaceutical products as well as medical devices. We began the journey, again, 6 years ago under the umbrella of digitalizing our supply chain. So, Johnson & Johnson, as I mentioned, 3 sectors, pharmaceutical, medical devices, consumer health, they all have their own regulatory mandates, whether it's in US, EMEA, Asia-Pac, et cetera. Over 90 plus manufacturing sites, we touch 1.2 billion consumers and patients on a daily basis. So that's the complexity of what we are dealing with. So we spend quite a bit of time actually building a business case as to why we need to digitalize, meaning connecting our assets to IoT technology and bring digital in that space. So we went after the first things. We went after the practical applications, making sure that we are increasing our OEE, we are increasing the value of the investments that we've made over the past 135 years, if you will. But I think the scaling of IoT, it's a challenge when you think about your, data architecture, right? So, we've spent several years building our common data layer. We've been very deliberate in terms of once we bring the data from different sources, whether it's your machinery, whether it's your ERP system, financial system, et cetera, what do you do with the data? So we spend time actually creating a digital and data sciences organization that also sits in the center, and they're contextualizing the data, understanding how the products are made, as Eric was talking about, process characterization, et cetera. That's where you need to focus. I think the companies have a ways to go. So we shouldn't be no longer doing testing and learning. And, I think some of the capabilities have already been proven. So if we are a member of the World Economic Forum lighthouses, we've got 10 of the 114. So we've got the most of any company so far. And there's competition behind that. But you have to think about the dimensions of how do you accelerate. The value is in acceleration, not only a particular site, at least within J&J, but across the network. And that's where we have work to do. So a lot of progress, but a lot more to be done.
Yeah, and it's amazing because technology is such a moving target these days, right? So when you finally think you're caught up, you have a plan, something new comes out and you want to chase that too. Does anyone else have anything they want to add there?
Well, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. It's what we used to call, in the 80s, college and computer science. the law of acceleration, right? You get the next iPhone. Everybody's laughing at me. I got like an iPhone 6 and I'm still using it. I keep rebuilding it. But, there's always something better out there. And
Right.
with IoT, it's the same thing. We're seeing now we're moving more to a wireless society, and there's a lot less security concerns in some areas with wireless. For us, when we pulled a point, from the BMS system out to a control box or a thermostat, it was $2,000 a point. But now you got wireless controllers that you can put on there, and now you're eliminating all that hard labor. We just have more waves going through us, right? But it's definitely an evolution of change. And how do you strike it right at the right time, right? For us, we're looking at adolescence of older equipment, just phasing some stuff out. But yeah.
I've actually got a question for Sultan, if I may. Sultan, from a cultural perspective, meaning within J&J, when you tried to create that data org sitting at the center, what kind of challenges did you run into, and how did you position that so that it worked?
Yeah, so there's definitely a separation of the IT organization versus digital and data sciences, right? So it was a deliberate choice by our chief supply chain officer that this group needed to exist because they own different parts of the data. So we don't, the digital and data science organization doesn't own the IT infrastructure. So there's a business ownership and there's IT ownership, and it has to go hand in hand, right? And you have to think about the complexity of the funding model, and you have to think about, how do you bring external companies into the forum? You have to think about, we've decided to use Microsoft Azure. So if we bring in working with a technology business partner, if they cannot use, if they don't have the ability to migrate the data into Microsoft, into the Azure cloud computing platform, we just don't work with them. So all of those challenges had to be, we still have a ways to go, but I think we are reaching a level of maturity from the digital data layer, a common data layer as we call it within J&J, but that had to be it had to be something to be, you have to think about dealing with things like that. And I think if you don't have an executive sponsorship to drive this, if it doesn't matter if you're a large company like J&J, frankly, or a medium-sized company or a small company, it will be a challenge. So you have to think about those dimensions as you're bringing IoT capabilities.
So does your data org own the data then? Not
Yes.
the offshoot infrastructure,
Correct.
but they own the data. Okay.
Correct.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a really good point there of the role of, I think, organizational leadership in really setting the tone and how these things get adopted, because it's very easy, I think, oftentimes in a distributed organization to have solutions rise up in certain parts of the organization, but not necessarily with the adoption that they can or should get, because they're kind of bottom up. And then if they lose a champion, then they lose steam, and then something better comes along, and you end up with a lot of mostly built tools. And I think that's in one of the areas where we've really seen there's opportunity there to make sure that, we have an aligned vision across the organization. AbbVie's certainly undergone this as well during our digital transformation as a company, and really setting this tone and making sure there's an overarching strategy around the organization that's helped to kind of push adoption rather than just the pull from bottom. The bottom, it's the push as well from the top down of this is our vision and this is where we're going to go. Let's figure out we can align on the best way to get there, but really setting that vision is critical.
Yeah, I think it was really critical.
Very
was
good
really
point,
critical
Eric.
for us to say. Sorry, Steve, go ahead.
No, I'm just going to say it was a very good point from Eric, because we've always taken the bottom-up approach only up until about the last 3 years. Mm-hmm. Now they've decided to centralize, with one methodology and push it from the top down. And now we're starting to meet from both ends and trying to work through a lot of issues, especially connectivity stuff, So, yeah.
So can I ask a question to Sultan? So did you find that during pandemic, this digital change, the push, you were already creating and building things at Johnson & Johnson, but was there a real push and urgency to deliver to your supply chain at that front?
In a good way, it actually accelerated the digital transformation. In a good way, I think there's some of the investments that we had made or the ideas that we had in terms of how do you do remote visual inspections, how you do remote quality inspections. You couldn't send the equipment manufacturers to go fix something, right? So the technologies that we had included as part of the business case, so I'll give you smart glasses, augmented reality, virtual reality, things of that nature, tremendously help, right? The pressure that we were dealing with a particular manufacturing site not willing to invest because of the financial pressures, it just got dissolved, right? So we begin to now we are focusing in terms of how do we have a digitally connected worker on the shop floor? So how do we connect it to our MES system, et cetera? And that's where the focus is, because the future, I know one thing would be interesting to hear from all of you. How do we think the future of work, and how do we making sure that they're digitally enabled, right? So we are focusing as part of our Johnson & Johnson Supply Chain Academy, bringing those capabilities. So a shop floor operator is as best as he or she could be is digitally connected, right? So you could use the data on real time, so you don't have to wait for a data scientist to tell them what they need to do to run their line. But to answer your question, I mean, it was precisely, Shanu, it actually helped accelerate a lot of the tough decisions that we were dealing with. Some of the obstacles that, from my perspective, running the portfolio, it just went away. And I think that's what I'm hearing. If you read some of the Deloitte and McKinsey and BCG, et cetera, that's what's been happening across, irrespective of what industry you might be.
Nice. It's almost a little forced innovation from the world, right?
Absolutely.
We needed to get there. So, Eric, you started talking about the increase of adoption, and we had a question here. So I don't know if you wanted to add a little bit more, or anyone wanted to add, what can we do to really increase the adoption of IoT or other technologies in pharma manufacturing?
Sure, great question. As I think about adoption in specifically the IoT space in pharma, I mean, in general, the chemical process industry is very mature in usage of sensors, modeling of processes, and even being among the earliest adopters of digital twins. I'll say, really full-scale plant process modeling goes back 3 decades or more to be able to do that quite effectively. Now, when I think about getting adoption for IoT specifically in pharma, there have been challenges there. It's been for a variety of reasons. Realistically, a lot of the batch mode operations tend to make the usage of information for looking at the health of the process maybe a little less historically valued than they would be in a continuous process. And I think as the pharma industry moves towards more continuous processes, the ability to do inline monitoring, process control, and again, using that process control methodology of PID loops, model predictive control, cascade with feed forward and feedback control, all of those more advanced control logics are at least at AbbVie, always looking for where we can apply those to get better quality. And so when I think about the increasing adoption, it really comes to 3 fundamental aspects. Enrolling in the vision, which we talked a little bit earlier about, of really having the leader lead, make sure everyone enrolled behind the vision, and making sure everyone's aligned as it's kind of a one consistent rolled out through the organization. Another is creating the value. And we've done this a couple different ways. I'll give one kind of, I'll call it trivial example, but I think it kind of demonstrates an interesting case where we're making use of our data logging, at it from the lab side of things. Fumes in the lab consume a whole lot of energy. They consume a whole lot of airflow. A single hood can cost $8,500 a year in energy. It can lead to 40 tons of CO2 emitted per year per hood. People are leaving the hood open and things like that. So we use some of our monitoring capability to look at the airflow through our hoods and track that in Pi Vision, create process graphics and easy to show dashboards so that users could see this vision of, oh yeah, my hood is red because I left it open and I'm using a lot more electricity than the person next door, and I should probably keep an eye on that. And that kind of dashboard helps, I think, let people see that, makes it real for them, and demonstrates that value of turning raw data into information, actionable information. And also, I think, go ahead.
No, sorry. Taking that data and making it visual to the end user, I found has been really important. And like I talked about Symmetrics technology, which is basically taking data and saying what's wrong. And when it's clearly communicated to them, then we find that there becomes start of a culture change, right? They start to change the way they're working. Oh, I should have shut this sash, but I didn't. Most all of our hoods are VAV, but Eric, that's a really good point. Yeah.
Yep.
And it seems like such a small win, right? And high value right there. And you can make it real to them. It's not some big visionary project. You're like, your hood just needs to be closed, and look at how much you're saving here.
Exactly. And that comes down to is the third point that I was going to say to English, and that's automating the data handling and the visualizing of the information you're getting. Again, if you can make it real, set up process monitoring, trackers, things like that, dashboards that help people quickly visualize that information in an automated way that networks together the various sensors that are integral and makes that data real. It's so much more valuable. And again, I think as we, as professionals in the pharma industry, look around, it's a great opportunity for us to take that little bit of time to kind of, again, inspire those around us as kind of early adopters of Pharma 4.0 and get that enrollment from the rest of the organization, just because after you demonstrate those use cases, they just cascade on by people being inspired and thinking, hey, where can I apply this methodology in some of my work?
That's great.
Yeah, I'm kind of reminded of a saying we have around, well, I'm sure we didn't pioneer it, but it's just saying, showing people what the art of the possible is.
Sure. All right, going on to the next question. There's a little feedback there, sorry. Chanu. So we've talked about a lot of different technologies, IoT, and Sultan brought up a great point, Tesla, with IoT and being so emerging. And there's other emerging technologies out there, right? Everybody has an Alexa in their home or some type of voice assistant these days. What's the lessons that pharma can really learn from these other industries and other sectors that are using these technologies?
Great question here, Daniel. I'll just give you a small household technology that we all use is our thermostat. Like now, going from just a needle showing on the scale to now you've been controlling that on your little phone and getting the information. Oh, I left the lights on here. Oh, my energy is here. It is too much, like the heat is here, I can lower it down. Kind of thing. All that information is now becoming readily available to you, served to you, and okay, how much savings you can do here, or what information you can look, okay, I'm using that much of energy at daytime or at nighttime and so on. So there's a lot of sectors that are utilizing all this. And with pandemic really coming into this thing, it really pushed the boundaries of all the small scale industries as well as the large scale industries to invest into digital technologies and IoT, like investing into cloud, making sure you have the right portfolio design from the very get-go of your business model. The investors are now ready to take the skill, the risk to invest in this technology and move forward, because that's where everybody is heading towards, like making sure your AI, ML, and DL, like machine learning and device learning, is all in front of you. So the biggest lessons I've seen, or the problems that I've seen in the pharma industry, is like the investors at the very prior to pandemic were very hesitant in investing. Like, okay, this is outside our budget. This is not going to be feasible. Let's put it in the parking lot and then talk about it 2 years, 3 years down the road. It's not feasible right now. And then pandemic came in and just like, no, we really need it. This is the way of working the next life here. So more digital innovation suited for your innovation goals needs to be incorporated. That's the problem I see. Everybody's not ready to invest into it, because big companies, there are funding available, but there are startup companies that are trying to come up, but they don't have that much of funding available to them. But educating them and providing them some workshops or legacy standards to incorporate and adopt this methodology will really be helpful. That's what I feel like. That's the pain point I see. People want to invest, but they don't have the funding to invest, or they do not have the lessons learned or the test cases to prove that this will be an innovative solution for their company.
I do know for us that they want a strong business case behind digital. So a technology like Symmetrics, which is going to give you like 10% return on energy consumption in a year, the IRR is insane. It's not even, Excel can't even calculate it. So when you have a good business case, that's great. But in other cases, we have metering and things that we know we need, but we know there's no energy savings linked to it. So what we generally do is we'll put those items in a portfolio with other things that are, giving us a good yield, good return, good IRR and MPV. And now we have a package to sell on the stuff that's hard to sell. We've had to do it both ways because it's interesting. It's all how you approach it.
Yeah.
Do you think the startups are more willing to take it on? I know you said they don't really have the funding, but I feel like they try to do more with less people. So do you feel that they're more willing at least to try the new technologies versus the larger companies?
Yes, they are very in applying new technologies, but as Stephen said, there needs to be a good business case to prove it in front of the senior leadership team. Like, yes, this is going to work. This is going to where your savings is going to happen. This is where everybody can see the data in the real time and provide their input. Okay, this is how the batch can be released, or this is the supply chain issue that we are going to have later on that you can see right in up front. So it's just the model right now. We are so traditionally been using it that it's a little hard to break out from that cocoon and say, yes, let's embrace this new technology and move forward with the risk that is there a little bit.
Yeah, I think one of the opportunities here for the folks that are on the call in this panel, that we don't do an effective job in terms of benchmarking within the pharma. So irrespective of what it is that you're making, right? So I could be competing on an oncology product or immunology product with people from Sanofi or Merck, etc. But that's not the point. I think the opportunity is that if you don't have a business case, which I know it's always a challenge because we faced this 6 years ago, as I mentioned, we did build an effective business case. We were socializing it within J&J, and we are well on our way, right? But if we are clever enough to bring some knowledge from other parts of the world, other even competition, and in non-giving, we're not talking about intellectual property here. We're talking about doing IoT type work that is readily available to all of us. Why we're not doing that is mind-boggling to me, right? Because then because what you do here, the business case just it goes away. You don't have to waste your time building a business case. So if you listen to the McKinsey folks, they're talking about this pilot purgatory, which we were running into because we were doing these test and learns forever and ever, and there's no need for it. These things are proven. I mean, in Stephen's space, in terms of energy management, if you think about sustainability, you think about ESG, etc., the value is there. The value is there, even if there's no return on investment, is the right things to do for the environment. It's the right thing to do for the society. But I think we got to be clever enough in terms of bringing the value, the knowledge that people that are the experts have to make your businesses or help you solve the obstacle that you're dealing with.
Yeah, and it doesn't always have to be financial. A lot of our energy stuff is related to manufacturing risk, right? If we know about a problem before it happens, like through fault diagnostics, then we can correct that issue before it becomes an FDA 483 or a recordable, which nobody ever wants. So that's where technology, might not have a monetary number, a rate of return on it, but then look at about product risk. And if you have to shut down, and let's say you have to get rid of a batch in a bioreactor, right?
Exactly, to what Eric had just iterated just a little while ago, like having those dashboards created and watching them real time. or manufacturing to see where your actual process is heading and making real-time decisions and getting in to make sure that you are not aborting that batch or you're saving that batch somehow and trying to or put some controls around it. So having those type of technologies, having dashboards, having advanced controllers in front of you makes it more easy, data more easily available, and decisions can flow much quicker than going back and having those discussions for days.
It allows it to put you in the proactive mode instead of the reactive. That's what I find with the energy and risk mitigation within the manufacturing environment. Yeah.
Yeah. And from our perspective, we're basically a startup. We like to say we're a 15-year-old startup, but we're literally a greenfield operation. So we're getting to build things kind of from the ground up. We're a spinoff of a hospital. So there was no manufacturing facility. So we're building it now. So to your point, all of you, we've all had experiences in other companies, and coming into this area now, we get to say, remember all those times we had those conversations instead of we could start from scratch, here's what we do. Right. We're getting to do that in a lot of situations. We don't have the technical debt or the legacy systems that we have to shed, that there's a cost for shedding that. We have to stand it up from scratch anyway. So now the challenge there is that we've got to stand something up and it's got to happen quickly. And we don't have an unlimited budget. So, but to your point, Sultan, is, making a good business case. So fortunately, we have a very sharp CFO who's pretty open to, when we bring a case to him, saying, okay, ask a few questions and then trust us to do the right thing. So
everything always feels like it has to be now, right? Especially at greenfields. You didn't have it before, but it's important to have it right away. Actually brings up a great question.
Because we have customers, looking for us to say, when are you going to be ready for us to come and start doing stuff in your new facility? So
yeah. Exactly. So the next question goes to Sultan, which kind of tails off of that. What technology do you think is paving the way to supercharge the growth and efficiency in manufacturing?
Yeah, if you think about supply chain, right, it used to be what's called the SCORE model, so source, plan, make, deliver, right? I think where we're going, this whole digital supply network, it's not, it's not source, plan, make, deliver. It's all connected. The customer is at the center. How do we leverage our digital modeling capability? How do we use our digital twin? We're beginning to call it smart factory, even going back and thinking about, going from a bespoke manufacturing, right, fixed assets, hundreds of billions of dollars over the past, at least in J&J space, over the 130-some-odd-year-old company. So we are jealous of Scott because he's in a greenfield, and he could do, you could bring digital twin, you could bring smart factory, you could bring digital supply network into his manufacturing footprint. But I think modularity, where we are beginning to think, and I think we're demonstrating the capabilities of modular manufacturing, it's a Lego brick kind of a concept, right? Plug and play. You pre-qualify the equipment, something goes down, the line goes down, you pull out a piece of machinery, plug in the next one, you're good to go. Think about the expenses that we are all dealing with within the pharma industry and supply chain. Line goes down, you got backlogs, you got inventory problems, all kinds of stuff that you want to avoid. If you think about flexibility, you make the product wherever the product needs to be made, but that regional manufacturing, I think, is going to become important given the pandemics and the stuff that we've dealt with, and we've learned a lot. So that's where we believe that's where the future is, right? And I think enabled by IoT, enabled by AI, enabled by IA, et cetera, machine learning, it's all part and parcel of IoT capabilities. I think the pace of adoption is going to be critical. You certainly don't want to be left behind, even though if you're small, you don't, right? And I think we also believe that we have an obligation to go talk to companies that are in the stage of digitalization. I think we have an obligation, at least from a J&J perspective, that come and talk to us, right? We will share with you as much as we can in terms of what we've done, the lessons we've learned, the obstacles that we've dealt with, and how do you think about your environment. So we're doing a lot of benchmarking, as part of the World Economic Forum, Manufacturing Leadership Council in the U.S., et cetera, is we are continuously chasing who are the best, who could we learn from, in a non, sort of intellectual property. I mean, so that's not the issue. This is not about, giving your bioreactor technology away. This is about how do you make that more operationally effective.
Now, to Sultan's point, 3 years ago, we decided to close a couple of different facilities and go with a continuous manufacturing facility that could do multiple products. So we were just not stuck and restricted to one building doing one product. We designed it totally digital, paperless, everything's fully automated. It's the same exact concept, right?
Yep.
You got to think about resiliency. What happens when part of your chain goes down. Now, when you have doing multiple things in one building, then you can just switch to another train that might be vacant, right? It gives you like N+5. I think we have 7 trains in the one building that I was involved with. But I was more, as they say, on the energy side. But I do present that building because it's the model of the future. It's the IoT, and how do you pull all these elements together? Yeah.
Like continuous manufacturing, I would say it's the next technology to go for. That's what continuous is actually trying to do for at least for small molecules to make sure that we have continuous manufacturing, and it is. You can still have a continuous manufacturing with both batch and continuous hybrid approach, as well as or just continuous manufacturing available to you. So in how this new technologies, all the plug and play come into play, how it is going to work, that's something, as Scott said, they are working in the greenfield. We are also working in trying to get through a greenfield site to work that out and lay it. So it will be a less like a very good experience to work on how it all actually comes into life.
Traditionally, we've done things in batches, and with continuous manufacturing, every 40, 30, or 45 days, you don't have to break all the piping to the bioreactor, steam clean it. That's when you have the biggest potential to introduce contamination. With the continuous manufacturing, if you can keep that closed, we're finding that it's been highly successful. Also, with the yields that we're getting are much higher than the old traditional way of how we used to, grow cells.
Stephen, we've got two greenfield, and I would call 2 less greenfield companies here. So maybe some brownfield. So what would you, I guess, suggest as in considerations when you're planning, the greenfield startups or the brownfield sites? What would be your biggest suggestions or considerations to really help them leverage IoT or these emerging technologies?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question because we've been challenged with both through the years, but not so much on the manufacturing side, our research and development facilities. We recently built a building down in Boston. I can't say recently, it was in 2005, and I spent a lot of engineering time on it, but it was on a brownfield site. So when you're on a brownfield site, there's a lot of considerations you need to think about is, well, what is the contamination in the ground? That particular site, there was a big tank or stone wall there where they used to soak railroad ties. So creosote went into the ground and it was just not remediatable. So what we wound up doing is we capped the surface, but we had to put in a kind of like a piping system, fluted system to be able to pull those fumes out of the ground and remediate that. So we put a 12-story building on that, but long story short is on the brownfield site like that, you got to think about remediation. What do you need to do? And we wound up with like a carbon filtration system at the top of this building. One of the other considerations is really when you're thinking about a brownfield site or a greenfield site, you really have to have a really good comprehensive energy model. And what that does is it allows you to position the building in the right orientation, how the sun hits it, how the weather affects it. But it also allows you to do what we call parametric runs, 87, 60 hours a year, and you introduce different things into the building. It might be low flow ventilation, it might be VFDs, it might be LED lights, and you can model all these things to get to the right building you want to build. Whether it's an R&D lab like I'm talking about, we did the same thing with our manufacturing facility that I just talked about, continuous commissioning or continuous product rather, and go through all these scenarios so you can make intelligent decisions in the design. With the greenfield site, it's a little bit different. Now you got to start thinking about how do you replace the footprint that you took. Well, a lot of green designers head towards, I got to have a green roof on this building. I have to have trees and plants on it to take up that footprint. Also, impervious pavement, you got to be able to let it absorb the water. So there's so many different considerations that go into this. I mean, as far as design, what kind of boilers are you going to use? Condensing boilers, what kind of chillers are you going to use? And now that we're really advancing in technology and artificial intelligence, I don't see manual operation of a lot of these plants anymore, other than steam boilers. You're mandated, at least in Massachusetts, to do that. But it's kind of, what are you going to put into that building? Heliostats, prisms, solar panels, fuel cells, and what kind of BMS system are you going to have coupled with artificial intelligence, right? So.
Anybody want to add anything to that?
Yeah, one thing that I would like to add to that is for your brownfield site, the biggest asset to looking for a brownfield site is that it is already planned in that industry zone. So the city is capable of lifting off all that waste that is being collected. And it is more attractive to workers because it's within the city limits. It's something not outside. And there are other well-established other companies within the city that people can move around, share their knowledge and experience. Whereas greenfield, it all comes down to like timeline and logistics. When you will build it from ground up to everything plus workforce. The town has to make sure to give you an okay to produce that much of waste over there. Or maybe not, if not allowed, then the company needs to be able to off ship that waste somewhere else. So that's like an added cost that they have to all think about it. And in specialty chemical entry, I think there's more attraction in brownfield sites because it just pays more than a greenfield site. So there's another advantage of working on a greenfield place.
Yeah, plus the town doesn't or city doesn't want a greenfield site sitting, right? Because they're losing taxes. So yes. Anything they can do to help develop it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
The building we built in Boston, I sent it out to a few of us on the panel. It's a $110 million building. That was in like 2005. But I can't imagine what the tax bill was on that. But I'm sure that the city of Cambridge was happy that we built it.
Yeah, I think most of the towns are right now ready to do what they call it as like the shovel ready, where they make sure they have all the permits pulled up, everything, all the groundwork has been done, and making it more attractive for investors, for companies to come and build a plant over here and hire more jobs within the local area and rebrand the town or brand the image of that town over there.
Great. So we're coming up on the last question. Then I'm going to start with Scott, but I'd really love everyone's opinion on this one, to be honest. So, Scott, you talked about the art of the possible, right? And my stance in a lot of talks I've done for Lab of the Future, it's not really a technology challenge these days. Technology exists to solve a lot of the problems we're looking for. But, how do we overcome some of the IT and OT convergence challenges, right? And, what are your opinions there?
So that's an interesting question for me because when I started my career in 1993 or whatever it was, as an automation engineer, I kind of saw that we were starting to adopt some IT technologies, like, for example, Ethernet, or why couldn't we utilize some of these technologies? And as the years have gone on, I've watched that kind of, as we say, converge. And so what I've seen is, to me, the biggest challenges that I've seen, and I'll give two ways that I've seen that we can solve them, is kind of that territory battle between automation engineering and IT. Because automation engineering, from my perspective, is most of what I call OT, right? So just for context, I guess. So from an automation perspective, you're using PLCs that are running over Ethernet. They're using IT type switches, et cetera, et cetera. Who's going to support that? Who's going to own it, et cetera, et cetera. So how do you kind of solve that natural butting of heads? IT says, well, no, that's a switch, I own it. No, automation says, no, that's my switch, I own it. And somebody says, okay, fine, you want it, I'm not touching it. And then nobody's happy at the end. So to me, I've seen two ways that we've successfully solved that. Previous company to Andelin, we formed kind of an OT group, or we called it an OIT group, where we had the key stakeholders from automation and IT, which is mostly infrastructure and applications, where we had a regular monthly touch base where we talked about, here's what we've got on the plate, here's what everybody's doing, how are we going to, stay aligned on this so that there weren't those kind of territory battles and kind of those battles over, arguments. Hey, well, you went off and did this and didn't tell us, kind of thing. So, so that was one thing, is we kind of had a regular communication point, touch point between automation and IT that actually worked out extremely well. And then when I came to Andelin and we had the concept of the connected plant, we actually put automation engineering and the manufacturing facing IT under me. So in that situation, we're under the same technical leadership. So I have automation engineers and I also have IT folks. So, and because I've sat on both sides of that fence, I spent 20 years in automation and about 10 years in IT. So I've been on both sides of the fence and kind of understand kind of where that convergence is probably better than some and maybe not as well as others. But that's kind of my thoughts on that.
I think a lot can be learned from that experience myself. That's half the battle, is understanding who's doing what on both sides.
Yeah.
And I think common ground, right?
I think sometimes the people too make a big difference. You got to have people that are willing to talk, right, and willing to come to the table and share.
Right. Exactly.
Anyone else want to add to this? Eric, Sultan? No, anyone? Sultan, there is a question for you in the Q&A. It says, sorry, I didn't notice it was about a half hour ago, but it says, for the Central Data Science Org, how do you manage and prioritize data science demand of the business, both how much volume we're capable of doing and what projects we do?
Yeah, thanks, John, for the asking the question. I think it's just a matter of that ongoing engagement. What are the critical business needs, right? As they set their goals and objectives on a yearly basis, and it's always evolving on an ongoing basis. So it's a combination of so there is an intake process. There are various governing bodies that we manage. So there's a digital council that Digital and Data Sciences Organization owns. So the digital council, one of their remit is that to understand what is the ask of your pharmaceutical side, consumer health, and then the various franchises within our medical devices. So that's how it happens. So it's always, their work is always driven by where the needs are, or some of the problems that we need to solve across the supply chain organization.
Fantastic. Okay, so we are entering our Q&A segment. So if anyone has any questions, please add it in the Q&A tab. I thank all of the panelists so far. Some great conversations here, and a lot of you did my job for me, so I just sat back and listened to the conversation, which makes it a lot easier. We'll give it a couple of minutes. There you are, Mark. Hey, Mark.
Hey. Any questions from the audience at this point? You've all done an excellent job of sharing your insights and answering everybody's questions. Is there anything else that you'd like to ask, Daniel?
No, I appreciate the opportunity. I mean, there's so much technology out there. As I've been saying, I've done Lab of the Future talks for a good part of my career, and manufacturing isn't very far off when it comes to technology. There's so much out there. We're watching people grow up, with technologies that we wish for in the industries, right? So it exists. We just need to have an open mind to really go out there and leverage it. And maybe there'll be less of an impotence of like another pandemic to really help make the evolution happen faster. But let's see where we go.
It looks like, another question came up Do you have any advice on overcoming cybersecurity challenges with IoT and biopharma? And I can answer to that a little bit. Yes. I'm finding that with wireless technology, as we're moving in that direction, it's not as difficult as it has been in the past of, pushing and pulling data through the firewall has always been the real concern from cybersecurity. We're finding it's a little bit easier when we keep stuff on our side of the firewall, meaning I have a collection device. It's a wireless device. It's collecting everything in the building, and then it's using a cell transmission to go to my client who's going to analyze the data for me. So I think there's two sides of that. I'd be interested in just hearing if anybody has any thoughts on that. Something that's in my everyday life lately.
So I can start off on one of those kind of a thought on that. I've seen the value of again wireless sensors, and we're integrating that within the plant environment. I think there's so much capability there, especially within the modular nature as we kind of move to a more modular manufacturing process. Unlocking the reconfigurable nature of being able to move that sensor around and not have to worry about if you have enough I/O readouts in that corner of the plant room to be able to read all that in is I think really valuable and transformative. And so at least at AbbVie, we're looking towards that direction as we upgrade some of our manufacturing suites and our pilot suites, always thinking about where can we pull in those technologies to get more sensors and more out of our sensors. Again, we keep a lot of the actual data itself in-house and maybe stored on different internal frameworks to be able to house that information. But yeah, the ability to use not just wired but wireless sensors has been, I think, something that we're looking at quite a bit.
Yeah, we've done something similar with the data collection. Sometimes we'll collect the data, hold it, and then we'll manually put it on a thumb drive and basically put it in hand to whoever needs to analyze it. That way we don't have to do anything with the firewall.
See, we do things, we've kind of done it with the way we have structured the network and the way we layer it. So that we have, fortunately in our new building, we've got 100% wireless coverage in the entire building, including the roof. So when they go up to do calibrations, for example, on the air handlers, they've got wireless access, even within the air handler vestibule, so they can do their calibrations and log it into the system. But then we've also got kind of segmented wireless networks that different types of devices are allowed to ride on. So they can basically go anywhere in the plant, and they only ever connect to one SSID. So they're always on the same network. So there's some things you can do with network architecture as well. Purdue model is always the first place to start, though.
Right. That makes sense.
Any more questions from the audience? If not, then maybe I'll ask one quite broad question, which I think might tie things up nicely. The question's quite simple and quite straightforward. If there is anybody just embarking in an IoT smart manufacturing journey, what advice would you give them?
I think one of the most important thing is having equipment that is digital ready, whether it's wireless or that you can get that data back. And I think most equipment is like that these days, but that's something you really need to take a look at. Normally we would look at cost of equipment, installation, and a number of different variables, but now the IoT variable is in the equation. So it's something that needs to be evaluated up front, during the competitive bidding process, depending on the equipment that you want. But you want to make sure that what you get is going to be comparable to the systems you want to connect to from an IoT perspective.
Yeah, and I can echo that because when I came into Andelin, our purchase specs, this is almost 2 years ago, our purchase specs didn't include anything for connectivity. So I rewrote, that kind of component of our purchase specs so that going forward, we would basically start selecting vendors that would support the vision that we have for connectivity. Because in our space anyway, with a lot of the lab instruments, they're not very savvy on connectivity. A lot of the vendors are frankly terrible about connectivity. There's one vendor we have that is still using TLS 1.0, for example, which to some of you may mean something, some may not, but that's been deprecated for almost 15 years. So, we don't allow that on the network, and that's a problem. So,
right. Open protocol and backnet ready. Those are the only two words I have. You want to have that capability. Most of our stuff in our manufacturing is on Delta V, and it just goes back to our building management system where we analyze massive amounts of data, just looking for anomalies that could give us a potential risk of shutdown. But
Yeah, the other thing I can add to it is having, instead of having multiple platforms in your facility, try to consolidate to have one platform. So the data flow is much easier, much smoother, seamless, and you don't have to jump through hoops to scavenge that data out.
yeah, that's actually it's a great point, Shanu, because that was a big issue. Is especially in a lab type environment, you've got very siloed data. So part of and I'm going to put in a plug for a vendor here, but part of the way we solved that was with TetraScience, which is our scientific data repository. So all of the instrument data, even all of the instrument process and kind of equipment data, all goes into Tetra. And the nice thing about Tetra is you can decorate it with metadata. So when you go to retrieve that data, you have all the context around it. So we can attach all the information, date and time stamps, lot numbers, et cetera. Anything that's available, we can decorate that data and be able to retrieve and associate that later on. So,
yeah, that also eliminates a lot of paperwork that we have to go back and validate the system, requalifying the system, or even keeping the data in hand for presenting it in front of the auditors at that point. So that takes a lot of work, and it's less risky.
I think that's why we centralized on ePI as our data lake. Everything, whether it's a Johnson BMS system or an E&E system or like I mentioned in the manufacturing, Delta V, it all goes back to ePI now. And now we have this one big lake. And to your point, it makes it so much simpler that you can grab the data and analyze it from there rather than having multiple systems.
And I think some really good points brought up. I was reading the results of a Pharma Outlook survey a few days back, and I think what I was reading, 73% of the respondents said quality was the top objective of pharmaceutical manufacturing. And again, I don't think that would surprise anyone on this call. Quality is king. And so
Right.
I'd say, as we look at AbbVie, as we consider how we would implement new sensors, new technologies, a lot of it is about getting that broad coalition of folks who can all buy into the common vision of what's required from the quality side, for the release side, what's needed from the science and technology, the operation side of things. How do we manage the data? Then how do we use the data? And all of that really comes together to make a common vision. And getting all that alignment is hard. I'm not going to trivialize it. It really requires that feedback from diverse skill sets, as well as also, to be blunt, pharma is not a risk-positive industry, risk-averse industry. And that risk aversion sometimes means adoption is a bit slower. So a lot of, I think, in my opinion, what helps facilitate that adoption is by walking people through the state of the technology and getting that enrollment from maybe who would be the laggards on new technology adoption. And that's largely the onus is on the early adopters in the organization to really help demonstrate, okay, this is going to be a robust way to store our data. If we're going to use online analytical for in-process control, for in-process testing, and for release to move on to a next step in the process, we have to stand by it and we have to trust it. And not only do we have to trust it as scientists and technologists, but we also have to make sure our quality organization is bought in with those strategies. And so really, I think that is one of the complexities that's led to maybe some slower adoption at parts of the pharma industry compared to other commodity or specialty chemicals parts of the chemical technologies industries. But there's an incredible value there, and it's really just getting that broad alignment in that vision, because there is so much value there. It's a worthwhile investment to make in people, time, and financial investment as well. So that's my thoughts on that.
I would agree.
Perfect.
I'll just add to that. Coming from the vendor side, be a little open-minded, I guess, is always the thing. Any new technology or new software may require change, and I'm going to say may very lightly. It's going to require change, right? So there's a little activation energy that happens there, but we're all trying to work towards the same goal and ask questions. If you're not sure, you don't understand the technology, vendors are very happy to go out. Yeah, I mean, Cyterra will educate as much as we can about data mobility or any technologies we're using in IoT, and just have those conversations with them to really make the experience easier and faster and better, where we have experience connecting stuff to in laboratories, and you may not have as much experience, and so let's share that knowledge and see where we have to improve there.
I think we miss a lot of opportunities because people are scared of the revalidation process. I've been through it many times with, walking around the site and getting like 30 signatures on something. Somebody's out, on holiday or something, and you got to find their manager. I think that culture in the past, now that everything's e-signature, I think it's changed a little bit, but I think that's some hesitancy of getting, making changes, bringing new technology in.
I'm not going to lie. I'm one of those people that's averse to the revalidation process.
It's the sad truth, but yeah. Yep. I've worked on a number of CCRs myself.
Okay, folks, that brings us out of time, unfortunately. I'm sure I've been listening to what you've been talking about, and you're obviously very passionate about the topic, so I'm sure you could have just kept talking all day. Well, unfortunately, we don't have time for that. So I'll have to conclude it, and I'll do so by thanking each and every one of you. A reminder to the audience as well. So Stephen's presentation, it is available. You can download it in the handout section. We've made it available for you, so you can get access to it that way. So once again, thank you very much to all of the panelists. Thanks for sharing your insights. So special thanks to Sultan, Stephen, Shanu, Scott, Eric, and of course Daniel as well for moderating. So quick plug here for Cyterra. Mentioned earlier, Daniel represents the organisation, and they're here to help provide solutions to the problems that you face. So they are a sponsor for the event, and they have a booth. So if you want to continue the conversation with Daniel and his team, then feel free, pop over. You just have to go on the left-hand side, click on partners, go into the booth, and I'm sure somebody will be more than happy to speak to you. Otherwise, we'll take a break now, and I believe we are back at 12:40 Pacific. Once again, thank you very much. Speak to you all soon.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Dan.
Take care. Bye.
Thank you again.
Everyone.
Take care.
Yeah.